Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow and welcome to this latest edition of Tech Takeaways. It's full of fantastic little tech nibbly bits of information, all in bite-sized chunks. So on this week's episode, we're going to be talking about a topic that I think often between the three of us, we think this is something that surely everybody's already doing. But apparently, Wayne pointed out to me, they're not. So in this week's episode, we're going to be talking about why you need to back up Microsoft 365. Help me to have in that chat is my normal co-host. I've got Jason Fitzgerald.
Hi.
I've got Wayne Miller.
Hi.
So, guys, let's maybe jump into this and maybe start with you, Jason. Why should we be looking at backing up Microsoft 365?
Well, essentially, because it's your data that you're putting into M365. Microsoft 365 is the platform that Microsoft make available for you to use. Share your data in there, upload your data into there, but ultimately, it is your data. It is your responsibility to ensure it is protected.
So that makes a really good point. And Wayne, if I kind of come to you, because I know you've got some questions on this. For you as a business owner and for somebody who's not a techie by trade, you were saying to me earlier on, you kind of the assumption is I've put it in Microsoft's cloud, isn't it? Just all protected. Is that kind of, do you see that as kind of a normal thing that people think?
Well, I think this episode came about from a couple of conversations I had at networking, and we were talking about Microsoft 365, and I just asked a question. Do you back up 365? And a couple of people said, should we? It's in the cloud. So that was to kind of lead to where we are today. So I think, most technical people will assume it's backed up. A lot of people that aren't technical make the assumption that it's in the cloud, it's fine, it's safe a bit, maybe like Apple and some of the other services. So, for me, I thought it'd be a good one to talk about today. And why it's important, Jason, you've just covered that. But there's more than one part of 365, and we've worked on a couple of projects recently on the different elements of 365. Can you talk us through them and the different challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right to point out, there's a misconception that Microsoft are backing up your data. They're absolutely not. Microsoft make it very clear that they're not through the shared responsibility matrix that is published online. So you can go to the Microsoft website and search for that. And what that will do is it'll show you the areas that Microsoft are responsible for, such as making sure that the platform is online, making sure that Exchange Online, for example, is online so you can send emails, that kind of thing. And then the areas that you are responsible for, such as the data that goes into the platform. You're responsible for making sure that your finance spreadsheets that are put into SharePoint are backed up. And when we're talking about backup, it's important to remember that not all backup solutions are created equally. Some have got more capabilities. Some are able to back up, for example, Exchange Online archives. Not all of them can do that. Some are able to back up Microsoft Teams chats. Again, not all of them can do that. And then it's important to consider with the backup solution, how much of that you're responsible for. So if we look at some of the vendors, so I'll pick on Veeam, for example. So Veeam is a great technology. And if you want to be responsible for managing your backups and hosting your own data on your site, you can pull your data down using Veeam Backup on site. But ultimately, you're responsible for making sure that that system works and is operational. And then we've got cloud backup providers that will take the data from Exchange Online, SharePoint, Teams, all of those technologies that make up M365, and they'll pull it out of M365 and pull it into AWS so that you've got that cloud backup but securely separated off. But it's important that you realize that the capabilities of the backup provider before you get into it. If we take Teams, for example, there's a lot of contention around the various different backup providers with that, in that when we put files into Teams, we're not storing them in Teams, we're actually storing them in SharePoint, and Teams just surfaces that through the Teams clients. So when we come to restore Teams, we need it to be Teams aware, if you're going to restore from backup, that actually that's a Teams site, that's not a SharePoint site, and some of the nuances around that.
So, and you mentioned earlier that in the scenario where Microsoft, for whatever reason, became unavailable, you could potentially use that backup data to stay operational?
Yeah, in some cases, yeah. So when we take a look at M365 going offline, more often than not, it's if there is some disruption to the end user, it tends to be quite minimal. We've observed over 10, 12 years of M365. Occasionally an outage, where people can't gain access, for example. But when we look at if you were to build up that same infrastructure, an email platform, for example, and you were to maintain it yourself, the duration of that going offline over that period is much greater than Microsoft going offline, because Microsoft have got a team of experts designed to keep that online. But when we take a look at the email side of things, if that was to go offline with Exchange Online, you're going to be pretty stuck unless you've got some kind of email continuity service in place. If Exchange Online goes offline, and becomes Exchange offline, then how do you do the communications to communicate with the outside world? Well, unless you've got an email system in the background, you can't. So in that case, restoring the data out isn't going to be too relevant. But when we look at SharePoint, restoring that data so that you can continue to work on it, that yes, you could continue to work on files and use the restored data that way. Myself and Paul see this quite a lot. When we see things like a restoration for backup, more often than not, it's not actually a platform outage. It's an end user's made a mistake, for example, and the file is lost for whatever reason. They've accidentally deleted it, or it's become corrupted, or whatever it is. You're more likely to suffer that kind of disruption than kind of M365.
And I think that's what I was kind of going to mention, that the reason normally you would do on-prem, you'd build a backup solution. It's around recovery. I've lost systems and I want to be able to recover.
Yeah.
But increasingly, the world has shifted to recognise the value of its data. And it's the information particularly that's contained within that data. And when we look at platforms like 365, that's really what we're protecting. As Jason's just talked about, it's not, while you have infrastructure outages on Microsoft's platforms, the chance of that platform being completely unavailable for a prolonged period is pretty slim. What's far more likely is the idea somebody's accidentally deleted something. And yes, there are capabilities inside of 365 that allow you to recover. So you've got things like recycle bins, etc. But you've got to look at the complexity of getting this back. And one of the big issues that many organisations are concerned with now is the idea of ransomware. And I appreciate people watching this might think, not ransomware again, contractually obliged to talk about ransomware. But actually, running inside a Microsoft 365 cloud or any cloud platform does not stop you being impacted by ransomware. Ransomware attack on a device, on-prem, synchronizes all that up into SharePoint Online. You've lost all of that information. Trying to get that information back using the versioning tools or the recycle bin inside of 365 is hugely inefficient. Not impossible, but massively inefficient to try and get that recovery. So finding the right kind of tools to address that. And as Jason said, finding the right kind of tools is very much a personal thing. You can do it yourself. There's on-prem tools, partners we have, people like Veeam, who will do Veeam backup for Microsoft 365, but it's a build your own versus, taking that as a service alongside your other service. And that's very horses for courses. Depends where you want to put the data protection. The data you're protecting depends where you want to store that, depends the kind of restore capabilities that you want to have. So, and also how kind of hands off you want to be from that solution. So, there's lots of reasons to make sure you're protecting that information, because ultimately it's your information. It's not Microsoft's. And if something happens to that information, you need to make sure there's a way of getting it back.
Yeah, you're accountable, aren't you, to be fair? And you talked us about Microsoft 365 backup as a service, which is not taken over that, but taken over the management of that and backing up into it to a location. Is there any size limitations, time limitations of the data?
Not limitations as such, but you've got to realise you're working within the kind of bounds of connectivity that you have. Okay. So wherever you're moving that data to, Microsoft do have some performance restrictions that you need to be wary of, because it's a big, it's a huge shared platform.
Okay.
So there's not limitations as such, but there are considerations, particularly how do I do a big restore? How do I do those kind of initial initial source backups, some of those can take quite a long time. And I thought actually while you were talking, one of the things it's worth bearing in mind, I know we've talked about in this episode protecting Microsoft 365, but this is true of other SaaS platforms as well. If you're using Google Workspace, you need to look at protecting it. Salesforce is a big shift to vendors providing solutions around backing up Salesforce. So, so this is not just about protect Microsoft 365. If you're moving data to the cloud, that shared responsibility model that Jason talked about, that's going to be replicated across these other vendors. And there's complexities in backing up and restoring some of those tools. So again, make sure you find vendors who know what they're doing in that space. But say it's not just a Microsoft 365 thing.
And from what we've seen from the commercials, it isn't an expensive solution, less than a cup of coffee per user per month.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we work with providers that will do exactly that. It's all of your data in M365, easy to consume. They manage the backups for you. You will be email alerted if it doesn't go well, if there's an issue with the backups. But essentially, it's a set and forget platform for a couple of pounds per user per month. So well worth it.
I suppose there's our tech takeaway.
Yeah, it's the information we're holding these platforms is absolutely crucial to our business, and you've got to treat that data like any other business asset. So, I think if you're putting that data in there and it's important to you, then make sure you're protecting the stuff.
Yeah. Okay. I've got no more questions. I think we're covered.
Have we convinced you should be backing up Microsoft 365?
Yes, because I thought it was sat in the cloud. I must admit, I was one of them people who said, yeah, true. I'll ask Ringy and Jason.
So it's backed up.
So okay. So maybe the takeaway from that is just because it's in the Microsoft cloud, it doesn't mean Microsoft are looking after it for you. So I think on that bombshell, that's enough from this episode. So Jason, Wayne, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your thoughts, appreciate your insight. If you want to make sure you don't miss any of our episodes, then do subscribe. You can subscribe here on our YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to the audio version of the podcast on Spotify, on iCloud. No, not on iCloud. What's that? Yeah, what's that Apple one called? Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, Apple Podcasts.
Says the disembodied voice in the background. So, but do subscribe on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and all good homes of podcasts. And as we pointed out earlier on, in some bad homes of podcasts as well. So until the next episode, thanks for watching.